Hey, my name is Richard Kannwischer, and I am here with my good friend,
Rene Schlaepfer.
And we're here to talk about Cultivate, how God grows the fruit of the Spirit in us. Rene, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, well, we're filming this here in Santa Cruz, California, which is where I pastor a church called Twin Lakes Church. It's a vibrant, very stereotypically California neighborhood. You know, a lot of people, Rich, think of California, they think of hippies and surfers and redwood trees and palm trees and all of that. None of that is true of most of California. It's 110% true of Santa Cruz, classic California beach town, and I love it. It is a great place to be in ministry.
So Rene is one of my favorite hippies in all of history. Excited to share with you, and so welcome to Cultivate. All right, Rene, it's good to be with you once again, and today I want to talk to you about kindness.
Yes.
And I'm wondering if you can think of a time when you've learned about kindness or somebody's been kind to you. Or
Well, you know, it's funny. I was preaching actually on the fruit of the Spirit, and I was coming up to the weekend on kindness, writing my sermon on this very topic.
You're like, I got nothing.
Well, I had to go to the DMV. And so I thought, okay, this is going to be a challenge. I'm going to be kind to the people at the DMV. You know, this is great. I'm going to... That's all right. Well, the challenge to kindness came even before I walked through the door of the DMV. Traffic was bad. They closed right at 5. So I'm thinking, all right, it's 4:50. So somebody had told me, if you can make it in at the end, it can be good because there's hardly any lines. So it was half strategy, but I was running a little bit later than I should have been. When I go there, I see a man and he has a walker. And he is trying to get into his walker from his car, very elderly man. And he just can't make it. And I'm walking right past this guy thinking to myself, if I'm being kind, I probably should help him get into his walker and into the DMV. But I'm not going to make it if I stop to help him with the walker. And I'm thinking, no, what would Jesus do? And I'm thinking, but what if Jesus needed a driver's license? He'd go straight past this guy. And then I thought, well, I'm preaching on kindness next week, so I got to be kind. So I stopped. I helped him into his walker. It was a large guy. And so it went very slowly. And then I helped him to the front door very slowly. And do you remember Tim Conway on the Carol Burnett show?
Yeah.
How he used to play that old man who would just walk in micro steps everywhere, yeah. Mr. Svensson or whoever it was he called it. This is this guy to a T. And at one point I even thought, am I on candid camera? Because this is
I'm
going...
getting punked right now.
I am absolutely getting punked, especially when we get to the door. It's maybe a couple of minutes to 5. And he goes, kid you not, I left my papers in the car. And he turns his walker around to shuffle back to his car. And I'm like, I'll get your papers. And I went back to his car, ruffled around and found the papers. And then I rushed back to the front door, hand them to him. The second hand is sweeping the 12. It's now closing time. And there's a DMV guy, I kid you not, on the other side of the door looking at us. And he goes, click. And he holds the door closed, and he and I are standing on the other side of the door, and he's just looking at us. The DMV guy is. He's smiling at us. Like, I just locked the door, and you guys are on the other side of the door. And I tell the man, I'm sorry, but you missed it. In fact, we missed it, friend. Almost thinking to myself, I shouldn't have been kind. And then the smiling DMV guy unlocks the door, opens it a crack, and says, I've been watching you this whole time, Pastor Rene. And you were so helpful to this man. I am opening the door for you after hours. And I thought, God, do you do these things to me so I have sermon illustrations? This is so good. But here's my application. Kindness opens doors. Mm-hmm. It just does. Mm-hmm. Kindness opens doors to the gospel. It opens doors to the heart of Jesus. And that's one of the reasons our church, we really believe in this principle so much that we have an emphasis every fall that we call AOK. AOK stands for Acts of Kindness. And we place a bunch of Acts of Kindness projects that we're doing in the community on our church website. And people can go there and they can jump in on one of the acts of kindness. And we always collect donations for our food pantry. There's something that a local family law judge started called Project Pajamas for kids that are taken out of their homes suddenly in the middle of the night. They have no pajamas, they have no toiletries, and we put together little kind of go bags for them with a little encouraging note. And last year we raised 1,000 pajamas for Project Pajamas. We choose a different public school every year to make gift bags for every single person on staff. We did it for a local high school last year, made 117 gift bags. They have gift cards in them to local stores, and they have a note from our church saying, thank you so much. And we always do it for public schools because sometimes Christian churches can have a reputation of being like, they're always, showing up at school board meetings complaining. So we want to encourage all these public school teachers. And every single time I get notes back from the public school teachers saying, you have no idea. No one ever encourages us anymore. Our morale is at rock bottom. So thank you so much for that. And we've had teachers begin to come to the church because of that. On and on. We do kindness grants, we call them, where if somebody has an act of kindness idea for a neighbor or somebody else locally, and they just don't feel they have the money to do that, they can apply for a kindness grant, and the church will give them either all or some of the funds to do their act of kindness, just because kindness to our community opens doors. There's plenty of people who have never been inside of a church here in Santa Cruz, and they absolutely do not judge us by our theology. They judge us by our kindness. That was really brought home to me when I invited a local county supervisor to speak to a pastor's retreat that we were holding, little pastor's conference at our church. I invited him because he's an atheist, very well-spoken, super articulate, really nice guy. We're friends, but I told the pastors, I want you to be able to ask an actual smart, articulate atheist how you as pastors can better reach atheists in the community. He said, sure, I'd be happy to do that. And so they were asking him, well, maybe if we modified our position on this cultural issue, or do you think it's because we come across this way, or should we have more contemporary music? And finally he stopped and said, you guys just don't get it. He said, I know that I don't believe in your theology. No atheist is going to come because of your theology or not come because of your theology, but they might check your church out because of your kindness outside to the community. That's the power of kindness.
I remember when I went through Alpha training. Are you familiar with Alpha up at Holy Trinity Brompton? And they say every intellectual objection to the Christian faith has as its root an emotional cause. And so somebody may be saying, where is God in the midst of suffering? How could there be there's always something behind that objection.
Right.
And so here's what they say is that you can never overcome an intellectual objection with an apologetic other than outflanking it with kindness and with hospitality and those types of things.
That's right.
Yeah. So it really does open doors. And that's true in, our witness. It's true in my marriage.
Sure. That's right.
I mean, it's true in every dimension of my life as a leader, as a boss, as working with other people. Most of the people that I work with know when they don't get something right, and they don't need me to wag my finger at them and to tell them that they really messed up. What they need is to be able to see the kindness of God in action.
And that's how God is with us, isn't it? When I say kindness opens doors, I love that line from Romans 1, that it's his kindness that leads us to repentance.
For sure.
So beautiful. Are you familiar with the work of Barry Corey, Biola University president? He has a great book on this called Love Kindness, where he describes the virtue of kindness that's just become forgotten for so many of us.
Yeah.
It's powerful stuff. And he says, kindness is not being mushy and soft.
No.
It's having a hard center but soft edges so that you actually get into relationships with people so that you can share the gospel, and you're living the gospel toward them, because that's how God is to us.
And he wrote that book at a time when the school, and he in particular, had come under intense scrutiny and fire over some social issues that were, and the easiest thing in the world would be to draw the culture line battles and to say, we're right, you're wrong, we're going to heaven, you're not, whatever the case may be. And what he ended up doing was realizing that this isn't just an effective public relations strategy. It is right in the heart of God. And he bases that book out of the Micah 6:8, loving kindness, what does the Lord require of you? And one of the three legs of that stool is to not just be kind, but to be the kind of person where loving kindness really does characterize everything you do.
Yeah, where you truly love kindness. Micah's such an interesting book, isn't it? Because what's leading up to the 6th chapter is Micah sort of rhetorically asking, what does God require of me? And he suggests all kinds of things. What if I sacrifice this many bulls on an altar? What if I sacrifice this? What if I did that? And then at the end, no, this is what he requires of you. This is what God's looking for: love, kindness, and mercy, and justice. That's such a beautiful book that way. What about in your own life? You mentioned just briefly that you felt like kindness was important even in marriage. I heard somebody say, here's the key to a long-lasting marriage: be polite to each other. Treat each other like you'd treat guests in your house. Have you seen that to be true?
I have, because I think, you come to a point where you really take somebody for granted. And I mean, that's just the natural devolving of what that entails. And out of the Gottman Institute, I don't know if you've ever seen their
John
stuff.
Gottman stuff. The 7 Principles for Making Marriage Work. What a great book.
I mean, he basically says, he and his wife say, at the end of the day, marriage is math. We can chart with a couple the number of positive to negative interactions. And you're constantly making withdrawals or deposits in that marriage bank account. And one of the primary ways that we make those deposits is through an act of kindness.
That's right.
I hesitate to tell this story because it makes me sound like a better husband than I am, which is, Kelly had a really bad travel day and ended up having to bail on that travel, fly around, come back, never even made it to her destination. She has an expense account. She could have gotten a car, an Uber, or whatever the case may be. And it's later at night, and I'm just going to be there. And her response in the text is, you don't have to do that. That's so kind. And she has done that in so many ways to me. And you and I could talk about this at length, but particularly as pastor spouses, the number of kind things that our wives have done in support of us and of the church and of the kingdom through that. But I feel like that day I made a little deposit. And, not because, I had to, but because it's the way that God treats me.
One of the things Barry Corey points out in his book is that when you look at God's great self-revelation in the book of Exodus to Moses, when Moses says, I want to see your glory, and God describes his nature. First of all, that is the most quoted verse in the Bible by the Bible.
Right.
It comes back again and again and again. But the part of that verse that's quoted most often is God's kindness. That God is a God of loving kindness. And I do wonder, Rich, whether Christians who have a difficulty showing kindness to people really see God that way. I mean, when you think of God, do you think God's somebody who loves to be kind to me? Probably a lot of people don't think of God that way. They think of God as somebody who's demanding. God as somebody who wishes we did his will. God as somebody who, well, if it wasn't for Jesus, I would have really condemned you. He loves being kind, and that is his most frequent self-revelation to us. I think if we see God that way, then we're going to be much more apt to just overflow with kindness. Isn't that what, I mean, in your book, you point this out, how all of these aspects of the fruit of the Spirit, really their overflow,
Yeah.
right? Their overflow from what we've received from God. If we believe that God is lavish and that we're under a waterfall of love and joy and peace and kindness from God, then it's going to just overflow right over the rim of our cup.
Yeah, I mean, the premise for me is that this is the fruit of the Spirit. It's not the fruit of Rich or the fruit of Rene.
Exactly.
Or it doesn't originate with me. I can't create it, animate it, do any of those kinds of things. What I can do is receive it. And it reminds me of that famous Tozer comment where he says, what you believe about God is the most important thing about you. And so there's that story in the parable, in one of the stories that Jesus tells, where he hides his talent in the ground. He digs. And the comment that he makes is, I knew you to be a harsh
Master, yeah.
And so if you really do believe that God is harsh as opposed to kind,
Right.
you will live a certain way.
You're going to live a miserly life,
Yeah.
a non-generous life. You're not going to be generous with your money or with your encouragement. Well, that person maybe hasn't deserved my encouragement yet. They've got to perform higher to get my encouragement.
Yeah.
But if you think that God is not a harsh master, but a gracious master, then you're going to be lavish with your kindness.
Yeah. So maybe a good place to begin for people is just to try to tap into, do I really think of God as harsh, mean, stingy, judgmental, condemning, or do I really see God as one of his primary attributes is kindness? And therefore, out of gratitude, how could we not be anything but kind towards other people?
And I think be intentional and proactive about asking myself, is there something here right now that I can be kind about, that I can be kind doing? Can I help that person out, that old man trying to get into the DMV? Can I be an encouragement verbally to this person? I think so often, speaking for myself, I'm thinking a lot about my to-do list, but to have margin to say, how can I be kind in this room right at this moment? I think that's a way to activate that.
It's great. Thanks, Rene. Really appreciate your wisdom on this. Go be kind.
Will do.